Hello, my name is Stefan Kartman. Welcome to my studio. This is the seventh in a series of video tutorials dedicated to preparing and performing chamber music online. And today I'd like to talk about using the scratch track that we introduced last time to help get us through some of the specific challenges of preparing chamber music together online. The reason why we're using that scratch track is because we can put information in that area that we normally would have if we were playing together in a room. What I'm talking about is the visual. If you're in a room with other people and you're working on your string quartet, you can all come in together on a downbeat after a silence because one or the other of you in the group will give a visual cue so that everybody can come in at the same time. And we don't even notice some of the visual things that we do when we're playing on a stage, like if there's a long fade out on a fermata note at the end of a piece. Typically out of the corner of our eye, we see where the other person's bow is, and we try and kind of be in the same place in our bow so that the note winds up ending, that we're all kind of in the same area when we're ending the note. Whenever there is a tempo change and there's a silence between the previous section and the tempo change, somebody will give a cue and we'll be able to tell how fast to come in and also where to come in. Here and there, when we're recording online, there's an additional challenge because we're recording the parts one at a time. Mostly we try to work it out so that there's moving notes recorded first, and then we record long notes after that. But every once in a while you have a part that starts with moving notes and then goes to a held note, and sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge if there's some fancy rubato going on in there. And so in all of these instances we can put information, audible information, into that scratch track to use to help us get through those moments together. And then when we display this for the audience, we cut that scratch track out. Nobody hears it but us, so it's kind of like our little secret. It's how we got these things together, even though we weren't in the same space. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. First, let me dig into trying to tone up the files that we've already recorded. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this is because all along what we've been doing is recording a certain amount of silence before and after each of the sections that we've recorded. Now, occasionally that has run into the interesting situation where we're recording silence in a room twice. It's not such a big deal if your room is really super quiet, but actually it can be audible. For instance, right now I can hear the fan on my computer and I know that the mic is picking it up, albeit at a very low level. But because it's being picked up, if I record it twice over, it'll be picked up twice as loud. And in the places where it suddenly is stacked up together like that, that silence is going to be louder. And we all have a little bit of room noise in our home studios, unless we've got a room that's really in a cave or in a basement like I am right now. Then we can have the noise of the forced air from the heating or from the air conditioning or fans from your computers or whatever. There's always something. It can be a lawnmower outside. But the thing is that whenever we multiply the silences, suddenly everything is doubled. Remember that it can be up to 8 times silence instead of just these 2. And so that kind of thing can stack up and it's better to get rid of it. Also, it can look cleaner if you get your, both of those tracks that I was just dealing with right now, both of those were the first cello part. So, I mean, it's actually better if you can get everything in one track. And I'm going to do a little bit of that right now just to show you how I go about it. Okay, so here, I'm just going to take this guy. Let's see, I have to have the right tool here. I'm going to take this guy and move it over a little bit. I'll take this guy and move it over a little bit. I'll do the same thing over here. I mean, actually, because I'm going to move one up there into the other one, I could just take the whole thing and move it up there, and it would take care of those silences for me. So you see that's one track now. And it'll look a lot cleaner if after I've done that, I just collapse this track so it doesn't look as I mean, it cleans up the real estate on your screen. Um, you know, sometimes in the moments when we're waiting to play, sometimes the chair creaks, or perhaps we tap our finger on the string or something like that. You know, I'll show you a typical instance of that you definitely want to get rid of. I see it down here in this track. I see a couple of little blips there. Let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I was checking my pitch prior to coming in, and you know, you don't need to have that in your recording. You can do the same thing with this file that we did with the other one. Can move this up here. Can take this guy. Now, I don't want to move this one up here because that's going to cover over that already recorded information. So I do need to shorten that first so it's not competing with that, and then I can move it up there. Okay? And again, collapsing the tracks is just something that makes things look a little neater for you, the ones that you're not using. Okay. That's enough of that. I think I made my point. I'm going to neaten all of this up and show you a file that looks like that. And then I'd like to deal with why I use the click track on this particular recording, a couple of the instances that I mentioned. So let's look at our part. And here, if you'll recall, in an attempt to make a nice long pickup, long relaxing pickup, we recorded a click track, and let me just show you that. Okay, I went and neatened things up considerably, and you can see that I have everything, each one of the voices is on its own individual track now instead of split between two tracks. And if you'll recall that that long eighth note, what I used was one measure of eighth notes just to get it in. It sounds like this. Okay, you know, as I said before, that one single eighth note, I probably could have gotten that together with the rest of the parts. It really wasn't that big of a deal. But it is nice to have that one full measure to kind of get ready, because when you're doing video, during that measure, you can look like you're getting ready to play, and then everything starts and it's in the right place and it continues from there. And then you can play from the beginning to end and have a performance. But along the way, there are some key junctures where you need a little bit of information. So let's look through this. Let's look through this Pro Tools file and see where I used the scratch track. As we go forward, the next juncture where you can see some use of the click track is as we're getting from one variation to another, and I used it to help me to change the tempo. Here's what it sounds like. Okay, without that click track in there, it would sound like this. Okay. There's really only one voice coming in with the pickup. That's the pizzicato that you hear. And then the other people could have come in, but again, getting this together with the video, it's always good to have a little bit of extra information to help that pizzicato to get in there. All right, we'll move on. At the end of that segment, we've got to come up with the next tempo. And so I introduced some notes in between to help get from the one to the other. You'll see what I mean. Okay, so you can hear that there's literally nothing after those final chords. And then the next section starts at a much slower tempo and a sweet dynamic. And getting enough space in there and getting everybody to come in together again so that it matches with the video was a bit of a challenge. So what I put in there were just a few notes in the scratch track. Okay, let's move on. The other members of this are kind of similar difficulties. Here we have tempo change from one section to the next, finishing off this old one. Okay, there you have the opposite problem. There's a scherzando quality, and two of the cellists come in on pickups, one with a pizzicato and one with a legato in the bow. And really getting the spirit for the next section would have been impossible to do without visual cues. It would have been impossible to do just hearing the silence in between those two. So I had to fill that with some notes. Okay. All right, here's a series. Okay, the reason why there are three separate items in this is that, first of all, while the principal cellist is holding that note, there's just no information for the other three cellists on where to end their note. So if I take the first cellist out of the mix, you can hear why that might be a challenge, because there's no meter to that note at all. Okay, you can see that in this instance, I just use 4/16 notes to get all three of those voices out at the same time. And the effect is that they cut off at a certain specific place when the principal cello was holding the note, and there was no indication for them. Without the click track, it sounds like this. Okay, and you know that I use the same trick that I used at the beginning to get everybody in for that final variation. The reason why I had to put a few notes in the scratch track during the cadenza, I mean, obviously you don't have to worry about playing the cadenza with anybody, but I put those notes in after the fact so that when I did the video, I would paste the cadenza pretty much the same way when I did my playthrough, so that afterwards it would make sense when we came in together with the final statement of the theme. And then the only other reason I used a scratch track in this whole thing was just to get us to fade out together at the end, and I'll show you that. Now, by itself, the track that I added sounds like this. And you can see why I used it. So if I turn it off, you don't hear. All right, and so I use that trick trick in the click track to help everybody to fade out in the same way. Again, normally you would see everybody's bows, everybody would kind of pace how long their bows were, and we'd fade out at the same time and wind up in the same part of the bow with video. And that's the most exciting part of all this, because that's when it really starts to feel like you're playing all the way through a piece for a performance. Basically what happens is you're in a room by yourself with a video camera, and you have in your ears all of the other three parts, and then you've got the additional information from the scratch track that you put in there to make everything work, and you do a performance through like that, and then everybody else does their performance through in exactly the same way with the same information, minus their own part, of course. And so you come up with a performance. You'd be surprised how well things go together when you're doing 4 separate videos, if you have all of that information to listen to. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this series of tutorials, at least the portion of the tutorials on the sound. and we'll get right to the video because I know that a lot of you were curious how to put the video together with the sound. Okay, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.